Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Abhipedia, powered by Abhimanu. This is PRITAM SHARMA, and in continuation with our mains series, mains answer writing series, and that is probable topics. So yesterday, you must have witnessed science and technology lecture. Today, I am taking up Indian polity, and the first probable topic that we have chosen for you for mains this time is socialism and secularism debate. Right? This topic assumes significance in the context of the introduction of a private member's bill in the parliament by BJP MP Rakesh Sinha somewhere in the previous session, most likely in the monsoon session. Right? In that bill, he argued that it is useless to let the word socialism remain in the preamble because keeping in view the privatization move, which is speeded up by this government, bringing in far-reaching governance reforms, it is needless to have any place for a word called socialism in the preamble of the Constitution, right? Although he did not emphasize that the word called as secularism should also be removed from the preamble because BJP itself believes in secular identity of India, but he did press for the removal of this word socialism. So this debate has again resurrected, right, whether this word, whether preamble should be amended so as to remove the word socialism and maybe secularism also, because these words were not there in the original preamble when Constitution was drafted way back in 1950, 1949 when it came into commencement. There was no mention of any such word. In fact, BJP government in its first stint, it published the original preamble of the Constitution, right, in connection with the Constitution Day somewhere in 2016, right, so as to indicate its inclination towards the removal of such words called as socialism and secularism from the preamble. So this is the context of this debate today, right, and that's why I have mentioned the context of this word also. Right. In this context, we shall be discussing two probable questions. Right. Number one, critically examine the relevance of the keyword socialism in the preamble in the present day's India. Okay, that shall be discussing. One, we answer this particular debate, but right, it does raise question: is this word relevant today? Keeping in view, I have already keeping in view the privatization, liberalization, and other governance, far-reaching governance reforms which Government of India has undertaken. Right. So whether this word should remain, because socialism has almost been diluted in this country. Keeping in view the private sector is playing a major role and is coming very dominantly on the horizon and will play very dominant role in the times to come. Second question is, what brand of socialism does the Indian Constitution subscribe to? Okay, right? What brand of socialism? Right? This debate, this answer is also significant, in the context of whether socialism, right, as understood in the classical sense, as understood in the what we call as Marxist sense, whether this kind of socialism is followed in India, or India subscribes to modern socialism, what we call as a reformative socialism, democratic socialism, right? So this question, right, is answered in the context of modern socialism or reformative socialism, which Indian Constitution subscribe to, rather than the classical what you call as state socialism or communism, right, at the end of the day. So can this keyword be removed from the preamble by way of an amendment? This is the focus of our debate today, right? Okay, but first of all, we need to understand, in order to approach this question correctly, right, we need to understand and need to define what is socialism, right? As you already know that socialism is a very complicated subject because it does not indicate one thing. There are number of forms and varieties of socialism. right from scientific socialism to ethical socialism to democratic socialism to Fabian socialism. There are number of varieties of socialism which are followed, but we can contrast two main forms of socialism which are quite popular, right, called as state socialism and democratic socialism, which can also be called as a kind of Fabian socialism, right. Now, what is socialism in the first place? So, as defined here in this slide, socialism defined as an economic system, right, under which all the material sources, the means of production are owned by the state, right. It means socialism is always about the community. Under socialism, the famous slogan is that under socialism, right, it is the cooperation over competition. Competition is propagated by liberalism, whereas socialism promotes a feeling of camaraderie, a feeling of community, and that's why it prefers cooperation over competition and individualism, right, and collectivism, over individualism, right. Socialism has so beautifully been described by a famous poet, John Donne, when he says that no man is an island in itself. Every man is a part of the continent and part of the whole. Okay? He seeks to send a message that socialism is all about community, a feeling of oneness, community, collectivism. Okay? So this means that under socialism, all the means of production and what we call material sources, such as land, such as factories, right, and other all other means of production, they are not privately owned but owned by the state, so that their benefits, so that owned by the state, so that every member of the community could share in the wealth produced in the society. Is that it? Could share in the wealth produced in the society. So far as India is concerned, right, you can certainly answer that question which we raised earlier. So far as India or Indian constitution is concerned, India subscribes to not to classical form of socialism or socialism based on a particular doctrine, okay, as is practiced in communist countries like China and in good old days USSR, right, but it follows a liberal form of socialism, what we call as reformative or democratic socialism, which provides a space for the private sector to exist alongside the public sector also. Okay? So a kind of mixed economy socialism, where both public and private sector can exist side by side, is the brand of socialism which Indian constitution provides for, right? Whereas classical socialism provides for state socialism like in China, where all the means of production as well as material sources are owned by the state. Okay? This is what I wanted to discuss. This is the simple definition, although there are various kinds of socialism, right? Marx promoted a kind of scientific socialism, right, in the sense that he predicted, okay, scientifically, a kind of scientifically, that this socialism is inevitable one day after the overthrow of capitalism, and when this socialism is achieved, a communist society will be established. Okay? This is proven history. This is wanted to justify through his scientific socialism, right? But that kind of socialism is hardly in existence, in the world today, except China and few other countries like Vietnam and Cuba, okay, and North Korea also, right? Otherwise, socialism is practiced in its modern form, what we call as democratic socialism, in almost every country of the world, including India as well. When Indian constitution was written, right, the creed of democratic socialism was the dominant, okay, wherein it was realized that, right, socialism promoting a welfare state, okay, is the need of the hour, and that's why Indian constitution makers adopted this kind of socialism. Although that will be discussing later on, there was no explicit mention of the word socialism in the preamble to the constitution, right? So in other words, under socialism, the means of production are owned not by the private individual, we have already discussed, but the community, so that all may share in the wealth produced. Is that clear? Now, what is secularism, right? Secularism is quite simply defined as a belief in which there is a complete separation between religion and the state. Okay? And this is what we have defined here, that secularism means a belief where religion should not influence or be involved in the organization of the state, or in other words, it denotes a separation between the religion and the state. In layman's terms, we can say that secularism denotes a state's neutrality towards the religious belief of the people. Okay? Religion is taken in a secular state, is purely taken as a private matter, right, of an individual, whereas the state, right, is considered as a purely neutral entity, okay, political. If there is a separation between politics and religion, okay, where it is mixed, it becomes a kind of theocracy, okay, right, where religion is promoted as the official religion of the state, in our neighborhood, that is in Pakistan, which is designated as Islamic Republic of Pakistan, or for that matter Bangladesh, right, or many other Islamic states, right, they are not secular state because they promote their official religion. Hence, secularism is defined as as a belief where religion is not mixed with politics, right, and secular state is the one which maintains an equidistance or neutrality towards the religious beliefs of the people. It means it neither prefers any person on the basis of his or her religion, nor it discriminates against any person on the basis of his or her religion. Every religion is equal in the eyes of a secular state, right? It neither favors anyone, nor discriminates anyone. This is the secular state, right? And secularism is the belief that we have already discussed. Now, keywords in the preamble. As we already know that in the original constitution we have already discussed, there was no mention of socialism and secularism, but these words were added by 42nd Amendment, right, 1976. Right. There was valid reason on the part of then government, okay, led by Indira Gandhi, to introduce these words into the preamble, because being a socialist leader, okay, influenced by the socialist policies of her father, right, she wanted to introduce far-reaching socialist reforms in the society, right from nationalization of banks, which she accomplished in 1969, right, to various other steps, okay, towards socialism, towards the establishment of socialism taken by the government, right. She ultimately preferred to introduce these words in the preamble on the recommendation of committee appointed by her government, so that's the Wilson committee, okay, which recommended the introduction of this word socialism and secularism in the preamble. The purpose of introducing secularism was to make the policy of Indian state explicitly clear that it is a country for everyone, okay. There is no scope for any discrimination or any violence against the minorities based on religion or any other factors, right. It is the unity and integrity of this country by virtue of collective identity. That is the goal of Indian constitution and Indian polity, and that's why this word must also be placed in the preamble. Okay. It means by inserting this word in the preamble, she wanted to send across a message loud and clear that it is Vasudev Kutumbakam, okay, right, and serve them sambhav. That means all religions are equal in the eyes of the state, and it is better to introduce this word in the preamble on the recommendation of a committee. Okay. Original constitution I have already discussed, there was no mention of any such word in the. Now, we are answering this question in the context of the debate, whether the main debate is whether this word or these words, right, could be removed from the preamble, or is there any difficulty. Okay, this is what we are going to answer. Why were these words added, right? So I have already specified earlier कि इन वर्ड्स को इंट्रोड्यूस करने के बाद गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया, ठीक है, इंदिरा गांधी जी की गवर्नमेंट ये मैसेज लाउड एंड क्लियर भेजना चाहती थी कि एक तो ये देश सोशलिस्ट है, ऑल्दो नॉट इन द क्लासिकल सेंस, ठीक है, बट यहाँ स्टेट ओन्ड इंडस्ट्रीज हो सकती हैं, राइट, और होंगी। यहाँ स्टेट की जो रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी हम लोगों को वेलफेयर करना है, राइट, रादर दैन द कंसंट्रेशन ऑफ वेल्थ, ठीक है, एंड प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ वीकर एंड वल्नरेबल सेक्शंस एज रिमार्क्ड बाय द सुप्रीम कोर्ट, ठीक है, ऑल्दो देयर वाज नो स्पेसिफिक मेंशन ऑफ any such word in the preamble originally, and that's why these words were added. So in simple terms इसका कहने का मतलब यह है कि what was otherwise implied in the constitution in its several provisions, ठीक है, that India is a socialist state, although a democratic socialist state, it was sought to be made more explicit and pronounced by the addition of this word in the preamble. इसको और क्लियर करने की कोशिश की इस वर्ड को ऐड करने के बाद, राइट। ओरिजिनल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में आपको पता होगा डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल्स क्लियरली, राइट, सोशलिस्ट स्टेट का आइडिया को प्रमोट करते हैं, बिकॉज राइट फ्रॉम डे वन हमें पता था कि इंडिया एक इनफैक्ट आवर फ्रीडम स्ट्रगल वाज मॉडल्ड ऑन socialist creeds, and greatest socialist leader was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who became the first Prime Minister of India, one of the prominent members of the Constituent Assembly, right. This one, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, right, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, right, Subhash Chandra Bose, these were all socialist leaders. They were aware of the fact that without socialism, a kind of socialism, right, teeming millions cannot be taken out of the pinching poverty, okay, and gross inequalities which this society has witnessed since the colonial times. इसलिए socialism ही हमारा गोल होगा, राइट, और इसलिए उन्होंने स्पेशल डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल्स ले डाउन किए जिसमें सोशलिज्म को स्पेसिफाई किया गया अंडर इट्स सेवरल प्रोविजंस, राइट, एंड दैट्स वाई हम डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल्स को ब्रॉडली तीन कैटेगरी में इसीलिए क्लासीफाई करते हैं कि कुछ प्रिंसिपल्स सोशलिस्ट प्रिंसिपल हैं, कुछ प्रिंसिपल्स गांधीयन हैं, कुछ लिबरल इंटेलेक्चुअल हैं जो लिबरलिज्म के आइडिया को प्रमोट करते हैं, बट मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द प्रिंसिपल्स वो सोशलिस्ट प्रिंसिपल्स हैं जिनका पर्पस अल्टीमेटली इंडिया को एक वेलफेयर स्टेट बनाना है, क्योंकि वेलफेयर स्टेट ही एक सोशलिस्ट स्टेट होती है। यहाँ गवर्नमेंट की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, राइट, कंसंट्रेशन ऑफ वेल्थ, इनइक्वालिटीज, जो इकोनॉमिक ग्रॉस इनइक्वालिटी, डिफेक्टिव इनइक्वालिटीज हैं सोसाइटी में, उनको दूर करके, राइट, वीकर एंड वनरेबल सेक्शंस को प्रोटेक्ट करना, ठीक है, दलित्स, राइट, ट्राइबल्स, उन लोगों का स्पेशल ध्यान रखना, उनको प्रोटेक्शन इंश्योर करना, यही सोशलिज्म का पर्पस है अल्टीमेटली, एंड दिस इज व्हाट सुप्रीम कोर्ट हैज रिमार्क्ड इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ इंडियन ब्रांड ऑफ सोशलिज्म, ठीक है, दैट इंडियन सोशलिज्म इज नॉट एनी काइंड ऑफ क्लासिकल और डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ सोशलिज्म, बट इट इज अ सोशलिज्म ऑफ रिमूविंग इनइक्वालिटीज, डिफेक्टिव इनइक्वालिटीज, गिविंग मोर राइट प्रोटेक्शन टू द वीकर एंड वल्नरेबल सेक्शंस ऑफ द सोसाइटी, राइट. So this is what, right, it was sought to be achieved by inserting these words, so that this concept of the Indian Constitution and this inclination of Indian state could become more clear and explicit by mentioning these words, right. Same is the case with the introduction of the word secularism, right. Secularism word भी इसलिए डाला गया so that इस देश की diversity को, right, एक स्ट्रेंथ के तौर पे यूज़ किया जाए कंट्री की यूनिटी एंड इंटेग्रिटी के लिए, बिकॉज थ्रू वेरियस पुल्स एंड प्रेशर्स, राइट, द माइनॉरिटीज, वेरियस रिलीजियस कम्युनिटीज, दे वर फीलिंग इनसिक्योर एंड दिस द मेजॉरिटीज इन दिस कंट्री, राइट, ऑल्दो सेकुलरिज्म हैज बीन इंट्रिंसिकली वोवन, ठीक है, इनटू द फैब्रिक ऑफ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, सो मच सो दैट उससे पहले 1973 में सुप्रीम कोर्ट की बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर में सेकुलरिज्म को बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर पहले ही कह चुकी थी सुप्रीम कोर्ट, बट इससे और हमने क्लियर कर दिया, एक्सप्लिसिट कर दिया बाय इंसर्टिंग दिस वर्ड, ठीक है, इनटू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, एंड इट नीड्स टू बी अंडरलाइन दैट ये वर्ड हमने सरदार सिंह स्वर्ण सिंह कमेटी ठीक है, की रिकमेंडेशन पे, who recommended several far-reaching amendments to the constitution, right? It was on his recommendation fundamental duties were added to the constitution, right? Part 4A was added, right? And it was on his recommendation only these key words were also added along with integrity, right? Socialism and secularism was also. So in other words, in single line, the purpose of adding these words into the preamble, right, was to make something more explicit than was otherwise implied in the constitution. Okay, of secularism, it is very much pronounced in the fundamental rights in part 3 of the constitution right from day one, right? When there is there is no discrimination in political rights among the citizens of India. Every citizen is entitled to contest and vote in the elections provided he fulfills the qualifications as laid down by law. Okay, there is no discrimination, right? Indian constitution guarantees utmost religious freedom to every person in India, okay, even foreigners also, okay, not only Indian citizen, to practice and propagate and even profess a religion of one's choice, right? There shall be no religious teaching in government-aided government schools, although it could be possible in government-aided schools, but without the consent of the parents of the people or the people concerned, right? It cannot be thrusted upon that particular individual. So there are several provisions which were already laid down in the constitution promoting secularism, but इसके through हमने इसको और explicit कर दिया, right? Now the most important question, and that is the central piece of our debate, in today's topic, that is, can these words, be in the context of the bill which was introduced in the parliament, can the word socialism, right, if not secularism, can the word socialism be removed by way of an amendment from the preamble, right? Now this is the answer to this question, that we already know that Indian constitution based on certain basic premises, basic pillars which constitute the basic structure of the constitution, basic foundation of the constitution, right? Basic structure in layman's language you can understand कि just like the organs of our body, okay, without which body cannot function, like liver, kidneys, right, heart, right, and similar other organs, our body cannot function, they constitute the basic structure, right? Whereas there are other parts of the body like nails, hair, they can be cut and they can be altered, okay, they do not constitute the basic structure. Similarly, there are certain features of our constitution, right, which cannot be altered by way of an amendment, and these features, right, these features, so those those ideas, are actually reflected in the preamble, right? Therefore, since the basic structure of the constitution as laid down by our Supreme Court in the historic Keshavananda Bharati case, since the basic structure of the constitution cannot be altered, okay, cannot be amended, right, even under Article 368 of the constitution, which provides the procedure for the amendment of the constitution, therefore it is very difficult to remove these words from the preamble, because every word, every key word, which although it is it is merely a spirit of the constitution, every key word in the preamble to the constitution is a part of the basic structure. Therefore, right, it is very, very difficult to amend the preamble so as to emasculate these words from the preamble, and this is what, okay. So can these words be removed? So as we can simply answer this question, that as we already know that in historic Keshavananda Bharati case, Supreme Court enunciated his famous doctrine of basic structure, which categorically states that entire constitution can be amended, okay, even fundamental rights can also be amended, okay, provided the procedures followed as laid down under Article 368, but that amendment, that constitutional amendment, cannot violate or obliterate the basic structure of the constitution. And this basic structure of the constitution is very much laid down in the preamble of the constitution, and preamble being a part of the constitution, right, is also subject to the same limitation as any part of the constitution does, जैसे दूसरे पार्ट हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के जो बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर को कॉन्स्टिट्यूट करते हैं वो अमेंड नहीं हो सकते। सिमिलरली प्रीएम्बल के ऊपर भी वही लिमिटेशन है, बिकॉज इट इज़ अ पार्ट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन। ऑल्दो ये अलग बात है कि प्रीएम्बल ना ही कोई पावर देता है, ना ही कोई पावर के ऊपर कोई लिमिटेशन इम्पोज करता है, राइट। ये एक की है, राइट, जिसके थ्रू हम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को इंटरप्रेट करते हैं जहाँ भी कोई एम्बिग्विटी होती है, राइट, या कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकर्स के माइंड को ओपन करने की चाबी है ये, राइट। बट राइट, इसमें ये सारे वर्ड जो सेकुलरिज्म, सोशलिज्म, ये बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर को प्रमोट करते हैं। एंड सुप्रीम कोर्ट कैटेगोरिकली पॉइंटेड आउट इन दिस हिस्टोरिक जजमेंट दैट बेसिक कोई भी अमेंडमेंट जो बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर को एनहांस करती हो, जो उसको बढ़ाती हो, दैट इज वेलकम। बट एनी अमेंडमेंट विच seeks to dilute the basic structure, seeks to tinker with the basic structure, this is absolutely unconstitutional, even though such an amendment is passed with special procedure by fulfilling the majorities, in both the houses of the parliament, right. It cannot be saved from judicial scrutiny on the touchstone of the basic structure, right. So therefore preamble में ये word अब amendment के through नहीं निकाले जा सकते, ठीक है। इवन दो वो स्पेशल मेजॉरिटी से अमेंडमेंट ऐड जरूर कर सकते हैं, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर को एनहांस कर सकती है, बट हम, ठीक है, इन वर्ड्स को निकालने से सोशलिज्म और सेकुलरिज्म का जो स्टांस है या जो बेसिक फाउंडेशन है हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की, राइट, उनको हम डाइल्यूट नहीं कर सकते बाय वे ऑफ अमेंडमेंट। एंड विद द सेवरल जजमेंट्स ऑफ द सुप्रीम कोर्ट, राइट, इसको सोशलिज्म को भी बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर कहा, particularly directive principles. Socialism promoted through directive principles has been held by the Supreme Court as a part of the basic structure way back in 1980 in Minerva Mills case, right? Whereas, right, secularism has been held by the Supreme Court as a part of the basic structure in several cases, right? Most particularly in SR Mumbai case of 1993, ठीक है? Secularism is a part of the basic structure. Therefore, socialism, secularism being a part of the basic structure, right, we cannot remove them, right, by way of an amendment. Therefore, this bill which was introduced by a private member, Rakesh Sinha, right, in the parliament, in the Rajya Sabha particularly, is of no significance, right, considering the bar, constitutional bar imposed by the Supreme Court, right, with regard to the basic structural doctrine of the Constitution, right. Is that clear? Now what is the way forward? Now last concluding it, so what is the way forward? Way forward is कि जब तक ये डॉक्ट्रिन है जो हमारे पास बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर, unless this doctrine is overruled by a bench larger than 13 judge bench which enunciated this doctrine in केशवानंद भारती केस, तब तक ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बार रहेगी, right, against any constitutional amendment which can act as an onslaught, ठीक है, on the constitution's basic structure. तो जब तक ये डॉक्ट्रिन है part of the constitution में, no amendment can be passed by our parliament which tends to violate or abrogate, right, the basic structure of the constitution, right. But मैंने जैसे पहले बताया कि जो amendment, right, हमारी बेसिक, हम preamble में वो वर्ड जरूर ऐड कर सकते हैं जिससे हमारी बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर बढ़ेगी, ठीक है, बट राइट, इनको निकाल करके मैस्टिकुलेट करके, राइट, इस बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर को हम कोई अमेंडमेंट पास नहीं कर सकते, बिकॉज दैट इज सब्जेक्ट टू जुडिशियल रिव्यू, राइट. एंड बोथ सोशल एंड सेकुलर कांस्ट द बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन जूरिस्प्रूडेंस, हेंस दे कैन नॉट बी रिमूव्ड बाय वे ऑफ एन अमेंडमेंट फ्रॉम द प्रीएम्बल, राइट. So this was all about today's topic, and in today's topic let me outline it again, right, keeping in view the current debate that has resurfaced in the present times about the relevance of the word socialism and secularism, right, about the word socialism and secularism. In fact, this question has also been asked by Supreme Court probably a couple of years back, right. और अब क्वेश्चन, ये डिबेट दोबारा शुरू होगी है, क्या ये वर्ड प्रीएम्बल से हम प्रीएम्बल की अमेंडमेंट करके, the proposals of a bill, right, he takes takes an ally that since original preamble to the constitution did not have, ठीक है, these words in the preamble, therefore there is no harm in removing these words यू नो फ्रॉम द प्रीएम्बल बाय वे ऑफ एन अमेंडमेंट, राइट। तो उसका आंसर सिंपल ये है कि भाई ओरिजिनल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर नाम की भी चीज नहीं थी, ऑल्दो इट वाज एम्बेडेड, पर बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर तो इनंसिएट की, इवॉल्व की हमारी सुप्रीम कोर्ट में 1973 में केशवानंद भारती केस में। यहाँ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की बेसिक आइडेंटिटी को, बेसिक वैल्यूज को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए ये डॉक्ट्रिन दी गई, सो दैट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की आइडेंटिटी खराब ना हो, ठीक है, राइट। जस्ट फॉर द सेक ऑफ यू नो जैसे कहते हैं यू नो पॉलिटिकल यू नो आउटकम्स या पॉलिटिकल पर्पसेस, राइट, the parliamentarians या government of the day, right, should not amend the constitution so as to rob it of its originality, and this is the logic of basic structure। और ये basic structure you know जब तक है तब तक हम कोई भी ऐसी amendment नहीं कर सकते, including the preamble being a part of the constitution, जो right basic जो constitution की जो basic values हैं, ठीक है, जो basic you know foundations हैं उसको अल्टर करें या उसको डिस्टर्ब करें, राइट। तो ये इसका सीधा आंसर है। तो वे फॉरवर्ड इसका यही है कि हम कोई भी अमेंडमेंट के थ्रू इन वर्ड्स को नहीं निकाल सकते, ऑल्दो यू नो प्रीएम्बल इज नॉट ए पार्ट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, बट सोशलिज्म जो है एज ए फिलॉसफी इट इज़ वेरी मच एम्बेडेड इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन। इससे सिर्फ बढ़ रही है, इस वर्ड को यू नो दिखाने से सोशलिज्म को सिर्फ प्रनाउंस किया जा रहा है, सोशलिज्म इज ऑलरेडी, तो इसको निकालेंगे तो एटलीस्ट यू नो जो सोशलिज्म यू नो का जो आइडिया है या सोशलिज्म की जो वैल्यू है वो डाइल्यूट हो सकती है, ठीक है, वो डाइल्यूट हो सकती है जो, या वो यू नो स्टाइफल हो सकती है, एंड दैट्स व्हाई सच अमेंडमेंट अगर कोई ऐसी पास होती है, सच अमेंडमेंट पहले तो पार्लियामेंट में देयर इज नो चांस ऑफ इट्स बीइंग पास्ड यू नो इवन इन द राज्यसभा, but even though for the sake of argument अगर ये पास भी हो जाती है then it will certainly be subject to judicial scrutiny, right, wherein right it could be stalled, right, or it could be declared unconstitutional on the ground of violation of basic structure of the constitution। so this is the ultimate answer कि वे फॉरवर्ड क्या हो सकता है। तो वे फॉरवर्ड यही है कि जब तक बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर है हम इन वर्ड्स को राइट नहीं निकाल सकते। Is that clear? So this was all about. Thank you so much. Wait.